Somebody decided to buy OpenServe, somebody decided to switch off the computer, and all of this content, all of this knowledge has disappeared. Now what Tim Berners-Lee wanted to reach is that this never happens again. And that's why he said, for an open system, it was necessary for it to be universal. No patent royalties, no standards that you cannot implement without payment. Absolute freedom to implement, to interoperate, and to work with stuff. So we had open source free software, now we have the open standards to do this stuff. The only thing that was still missing for a bright and shiny future is this fine young man, Lawrence Lessig, because he looked at it. He said, open source is abusing the copyright system to reach the exact opposite. Now this is the hack that we did with free software. We hacked the copyright system to perform the opposite, to defend the freedom and not the creator. Also the creator, of course, but more freedom, more important. He said we need the same thing for non-software, for music, for works of art, for literature. So he created Creative Commons. And you know, there is in his presentations Free Culture, which is, I think, something like 10 years old now, but still worth looking at. It's 30 minutes and it's perfect. And in that he says, remember the refrain, we always build on the past. This is normal. We don't invent everything from scratch. We build on what others have created before us. The past always tries to stop us. Think copyright. I'm far away from home, so I can use this term now here very loud. In my opinion, the copyright mafia, the movie terrorists, and etc. There's this whole intellectual property terrorism that tries to stop us from being creative. This is the past trying to stop us. Freedom is about stopping the past. But we have lost that ideal, and I think he's perfectly right. We accepted that it is perfectly normal that you go to a cinema and there are police guys at the front checking if you have a camera to do something which is considered criminal. We think that is acceptable. We need to defend these artists, etc. No, it's not acceptable. I don't want to live in a police state where intellectual property governs my way of living. That's why I'm a free software guy. Very simple. While the creative works from the 16th century can still be accessed in a museum, they're scanned in public domain. The data in some software programs from the 90s is already inaccessible. We are losing our knowledge every minute. We lock up data in proprietary systems that we cannot ever attach to anymore. If you have documents that you've created with WordStar or WordPerfect a long time ago, you are not allowed to open it in Microsoft Office because Microsoft says that these converters that do exist, they could open it, have been blocked in Microsoft Office for security reasons. Now how crazy is that? So if we want to make sure that whatever we create becomes accessible to our children, our grandchildren, and the rest of the world, we have to use the three big O's: open source, open standards, and open content, or else, in my opinion, a lot will fail. Now then, of course, there's this young man, Linus Torvalds. Linus Torvalds did not write a kernel. He wrote a process scheduler, and it would switch between printing the letter A and the letter B on the screen. And he wrote this because he wanted to experiment with the different operation modes of an 8386 processor. And he opened this very bottle of beer after the screen started filling with AAABBB, and he thought he would be the king of the world, and all the girls at university would come to him, and he would be happy ever after. Well, that sort of worked. He then wrote to Minix, so this is the official legend, that there was this huge fight between Andrew Tannenbaum and this little student on how to architect the kernel. It's all wrong. I talked to Tannenbaum himself about this, and he told me the real story, which I only am allowed to tell to you after 3 beer. So see you again this evening. And it leads me to 3 things that you need to remember. You know, I look professional in my suit with my hat and everything, etc. But the whole IT industry is built on 3 things. It all happened by accident. It was done by amateurs. Nothing's really changed. Now, this is the way IT industry works. 10 years ago, Apple was almost bankrupt. And then Bill Gates showed up on the big video screen in the back of Steve Jobs and said, I invested a little bit of money in your smart company, and now Apple can continue to work. And now Apple is bigger than Microsoft. Apple makes more money than Microsoft, which is partly to blame on Steve Ballmer being the intelligent guy he is. But it's really very important doing the right thing. Things change so fast that we cannot even follow it. The only thing that remains constant is the growth of open source and the awareness for open standards. So let's keep it that way. Linus Torvalds started working on process scheduling. Only much later he decided to take a look at the POSIX standard and make his process scheduler a little bit more POSIX compatible. The work of John Matter-Hall, who got him a copy of the POSIX manual, which was quite expensive at that time. And that became something he put on a web server, on an FTP server, and he called the directory not Linux. It was the official name of the kernel, who knows? It was called Freaks. F-R-E-A-X. Linus thought it was the best name ever. And the FTP administrator decided this is a stupid name. You're Linus Torvalds, I'm going to rename the directory Linux. And that's how Linux was born. Remember, all happened by accident, done by amateurs, nothing's changed. Net result is now I work for a company called Red Hat, which is quite a big company, due to this student here tinkering with an 8386 processor. See what creativity can do, how it can really change the world. This is Linux nowadays. Yeah? I started with open source free software in 1993 at university. At that time I was wearing t-shirts of the size XS, you know, just like he had. And now we're all grown up. Yeah? By the way, this is really true. There is a kernel symposium in Canada. It used to be in Ottawa, the Ottawa Linux Symposium, always. And they have this statistic of t-shirts they give out to the visitors of the kernel. And 10 years ago, the medium size was the biggest. Everybody wanted to have a medium or an S t-shirt. Now it's triple XL. I wouldn't want to sit on that thing. And that has brought us to the new now. Open source, free software, has proven itself. My customers and Red Hat have never effectively asked for licenses, they wanted solutions. And they don't care if it's open source or closed source. What they see is that open source delivers better solutions, that they can do more with it, that they don't have to work around bugs in systems they cannot control. They can do more stuff, and now they start to use the open source methods themselves in their organization. They're putting their management under open source, the open source way principles. I spent a lot of time explaining managers of big companies how to be more open. Everybody talks and discusses about open innovation. Now, as long as open innovation still leads to patents, it's not really open innovation, but that's a different story. And we have decided, as Red Hat, as a company, that the community is the most important thing. Now, if you take a look at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it consists of 5,000 RPMs, roundabout, so 5,000 packages. And these 5,000 packages represent 4,000, 4,500 upstream projects. And there is no such thing as the open source community. There are 100,000 open source communities, and some of them have very strange principles of working. Some of them are dictatorship managed. Some of them are so democratic that they never come to a conclusion. Some of them fork because they're not happy with the name of the project. Now, we have to cope with all of that to deliver a product, and we have decided to have, with Fedora, community distribution that leads to commercial products that we sell to our customers. However, 100% of everything Red Hat delivers to the customer is pure free software, and more than 90% of the software for Red Hat Enterprise Linux is GPL licensed. And we want to keep it that way. You will never get closed source software from Red Hat. Sometimes we buy companies that make proprietary products. Then we need some time to open source it. This is normal. For example, from Netscape, we bought the directory server, the calendaring server, and all of that stuff. We made it open source, but it took us almost a year. So bear with us while we do that, but everything we do must be open source. That's a fundamental principle of what Red Hat is doing. But this Red Hat way, it can only work if we respect the communities. If the communities don't like us, we have a big problem. If we have a problem with the communities, everything falls apart. And we in Red Hat, we are very responsible about this. So if there is a community that has a problem with Red Hat, I'm officially here to meet outside the door, beat me up, and etc. I'll do everything to make you happy. But it's also about money. You know, yesterday we saw Mark Shuttleworth explaining effectively the problems we had 10 years ago. Which is fun. Canonical is running into the same problem that we had 10 years ago. Now, they could learn from us, but of course they don't want to because they're Debian and we're RPM based, so it's a big divide. It's a holy war. We have the subscription model which allows our customers to get every new version for free. They pay one time for the subscription and then they can get every version that we support. We do not force them to take Red Hat Enterprise Advanced 5 or 6. As long as we support it within 7 years, they get their stuff. Now this has proven to work for us because compared to Canonical, we're more than 4,000 people. Now if there's one thing that I'm extremely proud of, it is to work for a company that can feed 4,000 families by selling free software. That really makes me proud because we can still follow our principles. We make enough money to do all of this. 75% of the commercial enterprise Linux market is Red Hat. We're absolute market leader in that. SUSE, Novell, Canonical, compared to us, they're really small in the market. However, we do not want to become the Microsoft of free software. That would be the most evil thing ever. Although some of our salespeople think it would be cool because you make more money. No, we don't. We're getting close to $1 billion US revenue. This fiscal year we will make the $1 billion number. $1 billion generated with free software. Stallman would be extremely proud of us if he wouldn't fundamentally hate us because we have Red Hat. And why did this all work? Why did all of that work? And this is where the problem kicks in, and this is where I want you to listen and to stand up again as we did 2003 and 2005. We build our licenses on copyright. In copyright, you can either retain all your rights or you can give up all your rights. And on this scale is where licensing lives. Now, this all rights relinquished, this concept called the public domain. There's a fundamental difference between Europe and the USA. In the USA, copyright is transferable. In Europe, thanks to the French Revolution, where we have the droit d'auteur, this is not possible. In Europe, the copyright always stays with the natural person that created it. You can give unlimited licenses and etc., but you cannot transfer the copyright itself. In the US, this is possible, which means in Europe, you cannot make something public domain. Technically impossible, at least if you take the criteria of the US definition of the public domain, which is kind of weird for the people doing SQLite, because SQLite is public domain software, and European developers effectively cannot patch SQLite because they cannot put it on the public domain. So in this scale is where licensing lives. And on the top you have the trade secrets, the proprietary licenses. In the middle you have the protective open source licenses, which is the GPL. The biggest thing which is protective open source license, the GPL. And underneath, using less of the weapons of the copyright system, is the non-protective open source license, BSD. And this explains to you why this holy war between BSD and GPL will never be solved. Because it really depends on how you define freedom. I define freedom as making sure that I can help my neighbor, according to Stallman, the Stallman principle, which means I have to use more rights of the copyright system to defend the freedom that I care about. Now the BSD people say that exactly that is limiting freedom, and our non-protective open source licenses is more free because we use less of the copyright system. Now you have to find out where you want to stand. And then you can see if you're a BSD or a GPL guy, and then you understand that this holy war will never be solved. It will always depend on what do you think, what is freedom. Do you need more protection for freedom, or is freedom the absence of protection? You have to define first that. And at the very bottom is public domain. This has served us well for 30 years. For 30 years, even a little bit longer. And if we go back to end of the 80s, there was the so-called GATT agreement, the Global Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. The Global Agreement on Trade and Tariffs gave us a wonderful thing, if you want to call it like that, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the WIPO, but it also gave us a definition on what software is. At that time, people were not sure which regime you should use to protect software. You know, if a lawyer or a politician talks to you about intellectual property rights, immediately ask him, which one do you mean? Are we talking patents? Are we talking trademarks? Are we talking copyright? Because they're completely different things. Now, software was decided in the GATT agreement should be governed by the copyright regime. That's why we build a licensing on the copyright system. And this has served us well for the past 30 years. It made software a huge market, a huge economic story, and we have all of these companies that do software, etc. And in recent years, in the past 10, 15 years, suddenly the patent lawyers noticed that they were running out of work by doing all of these stupid industrial patents, and they were looking for new jobs, and they decided that they can abuse the patent system to extend the evil arm of patents into software. Technically speaking, in Europe, there are no software patents. That's what the European Patent Office in Munich will tell you. We have Article 52 that says programs for computers do not belong to the field of patentable subject matter. You cannot patent software. However, 52.3 says, and this was caused by the UK delegation at that time in 1973, number 3 says the exclusion of the patentability is only for products as such. So software as such is not patentable. But if software is not as such, it becomes patentable. Now, do you understand the difference between as such and not as such? Trust me, I'm 15 years in the business and I still don't get it. So this is perfect for lawyers. And this is where they can do court cases and everything. And this is how software patents enter our world. And now, you see what's happening right now in the mobile world. I predicted 10 years ago that there will be an all-out patent war based on software patents. And the people in Brussels declared me totally crazy. Now they won't talk to me anymore because I'm right. Which is good for me, bad for them. Patents and the patent war right now is stifling innovation. We open source people, and I've noticed this by talking to developers, etc. Quite some open source developers will not publish open source because they are afraid of possibly getting sued. And I talk to these patent people in Munich and in Brussels and etc. And say, okay, I will accept software patents if one single thing happens. Give me an agency where I can take my source code and I can put this source code on the table and I come back after a week and they tell me which patents I need to license to have my software completely covered. If you give me that service, I will accept software patents. And then they tell me, no, we cannot do this. This is not possible because there's so many patents out there and it's tough to read which one. So technically speaking, you are not able to program software without infringing possibly thousands of patents. And this stops people from publishing software. This stops people in the US from creating startup companies. And this is so wrong. Again, this is the past trying to stop us. And we need to stand up and fight this. We did it in 2003, 2005. We need to do it again. I'm calling on all of you to be prepared, watch the websites, nosoftwarepatents.com, FFII.org, my personal blog, and etc. I will all meet you in Strasbourg and Brussels at one time in the next 1 or 2 years, and I hope you will all be there. I will even bring you some Dutch cheese. The next big thing is intellectual property rights and standards. This is another giant problem. We, Red Hat, cannot give you an MP3 player on Fedora or Red Hat Enterprise Linux because we're not able to license the patent pool of, in this case, SPS Thompson, and for video of the MPEG Licensing Association. Because these patent pool groups, they are not licensing under something that is open source compatible. They ask for numbers. We can license MP3 if we give SGS Thompson the number per month, the number of players we have sold. Now we're an open source company, we cannot do this. If I give you my Fedora, so the DVD with Fedora, you can copy it and give it to other people. I cannot take exact numbers of how many players exist out there. And that is why this licensing organization tells us you will never get a license. So even though the software exists, MP3 encoders are shitloads, some of them are better, some of them are And they embedded this kind of strange thing where open source cannot participate in the market of MP3 and MPEG players. And they put it in standards, and in ISO standards. So there is no way for open source to implement such a standard. And that's what we call non-open standards. And that's why we fight hard for a really good definition of open standards, that it creates a level playing field. We want to compete, but we don't want to compete in that way. Because interoperability, as it is right now, is broken. This is interoperability. I took two medium-sized software companies for this example. So, what you want is, you have Microsoft Office and you want to see the numbers of SAP pop up in Excel. That's what you call interoperability. Software interoperability between two applications. The problem is, it works like this. SAP signs a secret deal with Microsoft and the other way around. The patent lawyers are sitting there and they have NDAs and they create closed source. And then suddenly these numbers pop up. That's a good thing. The problem is, over time, it looks like this. It becomes a spider web of contracts, of NDAs, of secret stuff. And the real problem is, if you are a smart startup company with a good solution and you want to enter this market, you have to talk to all of them. You have to have an army of lawyers. And that's why many startup companies have to put 20% of their money on lawyers. Yeah? And this is wrong. Because what this creates is, first of all, for the consumer, for the user, it's a giant problem. They cannot simply update something in there. And if they update the Microsoft Office, then the connection to SAP might not work. And they have to wait for SAP to deliver. Then there's a dependency on another software vendor, and another, which leaves these people at old versions. And that's why you see Windows XP in a lot of companies still. This way of interoperability effectively creates a closed market. Think about that. This way of interoperability makes sure there is no open market, because these vendors have a sort of cartel of their own, where they can define what happens. And that's what you see in public tendering. And that's why they ask for these trademarks. And that's why nowadays they don't even have to ask for the trademarks, because there's no one that can break the system from the outside as a startup company or whatever. Even Red Hat is too small to break into that system. And this one-to-one based interoperability, where no verification is possible, is fundamentally wrong. That's why we want to have better interoperability based on open standards. Because with open standards, I only have to ask SAP to implement the open standard, and now I can verify on the standard level if it's correct or not. And if it is correct, it must be interoperable with another solution. If not, I can discuss on the standard level, but not on the product level. I avoid religious wars between Microsoft is evil and etc. Just say your ODF sucks, which is fact. The ODF that Microsoft Office produces is completely wrong. But I can show what is wrong. I can tell them how to fix it. And this is what we do to get better interoperability. Because as soon as you only look at the standard, and the standard defines the level playing field, the standard is open, the zero-cost standard for me to implement, to use with no licensing agreements, then I create an open market. Then I create a market for verification, for interoperability. And then a small startup company can enter the market without big limitations. This is what we need, and this is what we want. But open standards and open standards are two B's. This is OOXML. Microsoft Office Open XML. Not to be confused with Open Office XML, which is called ODF. OOXML is 7,228 pages of specification. Now, we are here in Zagreb. I know you are all smart people, so all the prejudices that we have in Germany against the people here means all of you are brilliant mathematicians. The best programmers ever. You should be able to implement this over the weekend, I guess. It's an open standard. No specification is available for free. Now, the funny thing is, OOXML, as supposed to be a competing standard to ODF, is not even implemented by Microsoft itself. And Microsoft explains to their customers right now they will never be able to implement it. They cannot implement their own standard in a strict form because this standard is so fundamentally broken that they can only do a transitional form of OXML. So my lobbying in governments is now becoming extremely easy. I tell governments, you should lobby for OOXML. Make OOXML the default document format in your country and ODF as a backup solution, just in case. Okay, no problem, we can do that. But then make it OOXML strict and not transitional, because you want to have the real standard, don't you? And that's how I promote ODF by helping Microsoft. It's fun, try it. So this is my best friend. You know, I would marry her if I could. This is the register in the UK calls her Steely Neely. This is Nelly Smith-Cruz. And Nelly Smith-Cruz says some very interesting things. Many authorities have found themselves unintentionally locked into proprietary technology for decades. This is a waste of public money that most public bodies can no longer afford. See, I've been lobbying for years and years in Brussels, and now she is saying it. She is lobbying for our ideals. I like politicians that know what they are doing, and they all come from the Netherlands. This is another one from the Netherlands, Frank Heemskerk, the Netherlands and Open Connection. The Netherlands was the first country to solidify this open standards approach. It didn't really work in the Netherlands. We've seen the example from the UK, which is getting more radical, but this is a typical thing. One country starts with an 80% solution. Another country wants to be better, so they have a 90% solution. Another one has a 100% solution, and then somebody wants to go 120, 130%. We're getting into the beauty contest of open standard implementations across European countries. So now these countries are competing with the other, who is more open. Now what more can I expect? This is so wonderful. And I'm sitting at the table with the Microsoft people, and we all agree that open standards are best. Even Microsoft fully agrees. And then Microsoft people are waiting that I start to talk about open source, which I don't. Because I know the best implementation of an open standard over time will always be the open source implementation. So they're sitting there, and they're hoping, and I don't. And then this guy from the European Commission said, so I take it with a slight surprise that Microsoft and Red Hat are fully agreeing on open standards. Yes. No. So you're not competing? No. This is perfect. Well, if Microsoft thinks it is good, and if Red Hat thinks it is good, and if it's IBM that thinks it's good, let's do it. This is what I think. This is what we should all promote and foster, because this is the open way. And by adding more openness to all layers of society, not only to software, but open data, the open data movement, which you've seen everywhere. It's the oldest principle on this planet. Sharing is better for society. It's really that simple. And that's what we have done in software for years and years, and we can be very proud of that. To give you one indication of why it is good, is FOSDEM in Brussels. Who here has gone to FOSDEM in Brussels? Yeah? FOSDEM in Brussels is around about 3,000 to 5,000 open source free software geeks meeting. Now, I've been there for the last 10 years, and I noticed one very important thing. In the last 3 years, we had lots and lots of girls at our event. And they were not the girlfriend of the programmers. They were hackers themselves. They came to this and they saw, you know, of course, also in the bars in Brussels, the girls come along because they see geeks and nerds, you know, they must be very good people because, you know, no, we earn quite some money, we have good jobs, and etc. So everybody likes us. 10 years ago, that was different. 5 years ago, if you would apply for a job in a company and say that you're an open source developer, everybody would say, ooh, dangerous guy, you know, he wastes all his time with pizza and beer, and no. Nowadays, it's seen as a big advantage. Being an open source developer means you're able to decide very fast, you have good knowledge of what you're working on, and you can work faster than anyone else. So now it's becoming a plus to work on open source. And one of my jobs is to travel across Europe and convince professors of universities to start working open source. Do projects open source. Make projects across different universities, not only one. I went to South Africa, I explained it to them, and when I explain it to them, I do it in practice. You know, on day 1, they have set up their own WordPress blog. On day 2, they have made their first commit to a public project. And on day 3, they have their own repository with their own software project. They don't get theory from me, they get only practice. And this is so much fun, you should really try. Talk to your professor. And this is what we call the Red Hat way. And with that, I'm done. For your information, what you have just seen is a presentation completely made without Flash, with pure open standards called SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. using a GPL licensed plugin for Inkscape, the vector graphics program. And I lied here, I'm not presenting with Firefox, I'm presenting with Chrome because it has a faster JavaScript engine. And I use the font liberation source. So everything you see in here is freely available, and I will leave the SVG file here at the organized copy. Thank you for listening to this crazy Dutch guy. If you have questions, ask them. You will find me today as a volunteer in this information.
Hi. In the spirit of openness here, could you please comment a little about Red Hat's distribution of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 kernel source as the one tarball and not breaking out specific patches, which is, well, you know the rest of the question.
So, for those who are not that deep into Linux, we deliver our software as RPM, the RPM package format. And an RPM is the binary version, and to that you also have a source version. Today the source code which builds a binary. In the source version, you typically have pristine sources, so the upstream source package, and then a bunch of patches that create the source code that we then compile and move into our kernel. Now, in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, for example, we're based on the 2632 kernel, which means we take the source code of 2632, but there are lots of changes that we then make, of course, new hardware drivers, security patches, because we support the API for 7 years. In the past, you would get in the source RPM every single patch as a separate patch file. Now, there are two reasons for this. The one reason you will understand and accept, and the other one we will fight over. That's normal. The one reason is we had more than 6,000 patch files in that RPM, and managing all the variants simply became a lot of work. So we were thinking maybe we should put the whole Git tree into the source RPM, but that would break RPM. It's not compatible with the definition of RPM. On the other hand, let's be honest. We're cool people, but we have companies like Oracle, we have companies like Novell, that simply take our sources, because they're open source and freely available, recompile them themselves, call themselves Red Hat compatible, and go into the market with 50% less support cost. Sometimes even 90%. I'm not kidding here. Now we need to defend ourselves against this. We employ 4,000 people. So how can we defend ourselves? By staying absolutely compatible with the GPL, but making it a little bit more complicated for Oracle, and that's where the decision comes from. Now, being totally honest to you, I am not behind that decision. I think it is the wrong way to do it. But I'm just the evangelist. I'm only here to talk. I do not make these decisions. Technically speaking, I've talked to the people from the CentOS project about this, and they say, to us it's no real difference. The moment there is a second kernel, we can diff the source packages and we know exactly what we've done. So we make life a little bit more complicated for some to save the rest of us. We talk to the people in the Debian project who also look at our patch stuff and etc. But they also say, we are upstream not using your kernel anyway, so a lot of these patches are not really that important for us. These patches are really only important for Red Hat customers and users of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and they should be our customers. And if they are our customers, they get every single patch from an internal Git repository without any problem. I know it's a complicated thing, and I know it's not perfectly in line with the ideals that we should do as a free software company, but we have to defend ourselves, unfortunately, a little bit more as we have to do in the past. So, I don't like it. Red Hat became big by supporting commercial applications on top of Linux, by giving a working, compatible, stable runtime platform, for example, for Oracle. Now there's a reason that the majority of Oracle installations out there is done on Linux. So technically speaking, I have no problems with proprietary software running on top of a completely free operating system. I do have a problem with proprietary software that is needed to run my operating system. For example, graphic drivers from NVIDIA, which are not open source. Because from experience, I know that NVIDIA drivers can kill my hard drive. Don't ask me why, it's because they do strange things to the kernel. So having, think in layers. Hardware, operating system, stuff on top of that, middleware, etc., application at the very top. If this here is proprietary, no problem for me, fine. I would never buy proprietary software, but that's my decision. I give everyone the freedom to waste their money on it. That's perfectly okay. But downstairs, fundamentally, the runtime environment must be 100% completely free. And that's what I really care about. So my laptop, which is over there, has Intel graphics because Intel has 100% open source drivers. It's not the fastest thing, but you've seen here with SVG animated, it works good enough. It's perfectly good for me. So absolutely no problem with proprietary software from my side. If you really need it, if you think it's needed, I don't think so. And for small developers, it might make sense to do that, but what Mark Schonberg proposed yesterday with an app market might not be my way of doing this.
But the question was App Store for GPL licensed software.
Charging money for GPL licensed software. Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
That's what we do all day.
Yes, but let's say a project like game, they have a really tough time creating new pages and new features because they have only like 2 developers. And there are lots of examples like this in the open source community, and they would really benefit from an app store that
that's important.
Users could donate money to those projects.
This is what we, for example, in Fedora land, we work on the TransIFX system for translation, and we encourage university students and groups to simply go through this and help whatever open source project in translating their documentation, building better documents, etc. Because developers should not do this. Developers should spit out the fundamental man pages, but developers simply are not able to switch to the user role and write it in a way that they can understand it. And there's a huge opportunity here, in my opinion, for people wanting to become technical translators and etc. Participate in the open source ecosystem, get more experience with real working translations, and join there. And setting that up, that's where I agree. That's stuff that Canonical, Ubuntu, that Fedora, we are already doing this, especially for translations. But we should definitely do more in that regard. Yes. Okay. I guess I'm out of time now.
Yeah, maybe one more, perhaps.
Can you tell us your official stance on distributions like CentOS, or what's the Red Hat stance on CentOS?
We love CentOS. We love CentOS. I love CentOS, art, etc. CentOS is the prime example that shows that our promise that we are a true open source company is actually true. The fact that CentOS can take our sources and build a complete distribution out of it shows that our promise is true. Now CentOS, the users of CentOS and the community around CentOS, if you go in their community and you see some discussions about the really hardcore problem, their first advice is always buy a Red Hat subscription and ask them to support it. They are our upstream provider. So everybody who is using CentOS is at least in my Red Hat galaxy. And now it's up to me to convince him to take out a subscription and pay me money. That's a normal sales job. It's nothing special. But if they would use Debian or Ubuntu, etc., I would have more work in getting them into my galaxy. And that's why I love CentOS. And there are people that say, but CentOS is taking money away from Red Hat. Every user of CentOS is lost money for Red Hat. And I think that's wrong. It's the same argument that the record industry uses. Every pirated song is lost revenue for the music industry. No, it's not. If these people want to buy a subscription, they will. If they run into a real severe problem, because that's of course if you run CentOS, CentOS is dependent on us producing and publishing the patches. The moment they can do their own internal QA is when we release the source code of the patches. So there will always be a delay. Now if you're willing to accept that delay, fine with me, no problem at all. I'm not going to convince you. But if you really work on mission-critical systems, these people come to us and we make $1 billion in revenues for a reason. So yes, I love CentOS, I like them, and it's good that they exist. But I don't like Oracle, and I don't like what Bell is doing with supporting Red Hat. Microsoft is not supporting Red Hat. I like it. But yeah, go online, go to expandedsupport.com. The website expandedsupport.com. Register to Microsoft Corporation, offering Red Hat subscriptions for 50% less. Microsoft is becoming a reseller of Red Hat. Who would have thought?
Let's thank Jan for the